Podcasts proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. A weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Thanks for being with me for another Broadcasters Podcast. KOP here with you. Today, as I record this program, celebrate my 8th anniversary of hosting my own programs among the banner King of Podcasts. It's officially when I really started using the nom de plume. Isn't that the way they say it in French? So yeah, that's really when the King of Podcasts brand came to be, because it was a little while before I actually went ahead and got the URL. I changed my Twitter name. That was the reason I decided to do it. It was during that downtime of the full time, and that's when I decided, all right, I'm going to do some changes here. I'm going to go ahead and make a change and create a new brand so I can do the podcast, because I've been using a different name for radio as a producer. I use a different name altogether. I use the last name Brasco, which is, I took it from the Donnie Brasco movie. And on the radio for some underground stuff, I called myself Johnny Brasco instead of Donnie Brasco. I didn't want to keep that for this. I wanted something different, and I figured by this point, I could go ahead and claim to be King of Podcasts. I thought that was a good name to have. It was a good brand, and I've kept it. 8 years ago tonight, as I record, is where it comes down to. I decided to go ahead and start getting into the business of recording my own podcast, because I wanted to make sure I knew how to do it, and I'd already been recording and producing for 7 years prior to it. Good time as any. And also, it was just wanting to make sure I had a website, make sure I could go ahead and, take care of the hosting fees, because it was a little bit of an investment. But things have worked themselves out pretty well. The only thing I'm waiting for right now is a new microphone that I can actually start using the show with, which I was supposed to get by yesterday. I talked about it last week. Well, Amazon showed up late. I'll just chalk it up to Christmas shopping as to why it did not get here on time. But I hope to have it next week. Either which way, this rig is fine. It works. Let's go and talk about what we're going to go and talk about here on the program tonight. A little bit later on in the program, we're going to go ahead and conclude my interview with Warren H. Cohn. Again, he's co-founder and CEO of HeraldPR and CEO and co-founder of Emerald Digital. Again, we were talking to him about the areas of crisis management, personal branding, website development, and influencer marketing, which we talked about initially in the last episode, in the first part of that episode, or that interview, and then we're going to continue on and talk more about the crisis management side, which is fascinating, who his firm has represented. And you're going to learn all about that coming up a little bit later on, about halfway down the show. So look for that a little bit later on. In terms of the headlines we're going to talk about today, a couple things to go and get into. We're going to talk about radio is fading, music streaming is stalling. So the couple stories that come into that is very interesting. The idea is that music streaming might be adding subscribers, but the streaming stays the same. There's some new thoughts about how contemporary hit radio, which is usually a mainstay in terrestrial radio, is hurting altogether because the ratings are just going bad. So what is that for the future of radio when it's not able to go ahead and maintain any kind of a younger audience, which for the longest time was what they needed to do in order to keep people listening in? They couldn't just keep working off an older audience and just living off of that and just changing the format of a station to go ahead and counter program to an older audience that might not be buying so much of your product anymore and might not be as interested in listening to you because they've probably adapted and adopted new technology. And, radio was never prepared for that. But yet there are so many things that radio can provide, especially from its heyday, that could really be provided now. And that goes also to another couple of things where people, some of the corporate types, they are trying to do things where they want to go ahead and try to get magic in a bottle once again using a gimmick or something that might work out. Television and movies do it very well. They always like to remake and rehash. I just read just today, I read 3 shows that are coming back. Night Court is coming back. It's an 80s classic sitcom, which I love. It was hilarious. And they're bringing that back, and John Larroquette's going to probably reprise his role as Dan Fielding. They're going to remake Fantasy Island. I read that. I can't believe it. And they're going to remake L.A. Law, a sequel on ABC as opposed to NBC. And Blair Underwood will reprise his role on that show. It'll be a sequel as opposed to being a remake. And then I just also read that All My Children is going to come back as a primetime drama because Kelly Ripa and Mark Consuelos want to go ahead and just go back and bring that show to life again. I guess I get it. So there you go. Remakes, rehashes, 2020. You'd think that this decade you wouldn't start any other way. But again, this is how we start the decade. We're rehashing from the 70s and 80s. I don't know why. I'm not here to figure that out. I mean, we can go ahead and contemplate, and I can go ahead and rant and rave about it, but that's not what I want to do this show for. Again, it's more about the details, more about the granularity of what's going on in the industry that's important to us. Now, those kind of things are very amusing and very stupid, but again, that's the corporate nature of the beast of media. Figures are going to go ahead and try to, they're so unwilling to go ahead to let people, by merit and performance, let diversity, equity, and inclusion, those stories should be given a place to be told, but not forced down our throats. There are proper stories. There are stories we can go from all over the world that we can work off of. I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe lifestyles right now are not so interesting anymore because they're not so diverse because everything's so tech-based. But we're at the point now where, we're just going to go back to old standards because there's nothing else we can figure out that's going to work. That's what they decided to do. Oh, well. Anyway, let's get into the stories. Also, we're going to talk about the Journalism Crisis 2020, a year in review, which Columbia Journalism Review provided, and some interesting news now finally in the front of the labor unions because the Writers Guild has made some long-standing progress when it comes to the old style that Hollywood worked with the agents and the studios. We're going to talk all about that a little bit later on as well. But first, radio I want to talk about because this is important to me. And, listen, I know this program, it's a very niche audience. This is a very niche program. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like what I do here, everybody's not going to go ahead and be all on board with what I'm talking about. Not in terms of that it's not interesting. It's just that it is very industry-centric. And I can understand where people are not so caught up on it. But again, I think there's an audience out there. And the thing is, this is something that interests me. Like, I understand if I don't have a big audience for this show. That's okay. Like, we're getting an audience and it's growing. Like, people are listening to it. And I'm glad they do. And I'd love to go and listen, hear from you. Please go ahead and feel free to rate and review through Apple Podcasts. Email me, kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. You can also do me there. Or you can also reach me on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/JBRASCO951. Maybe send me a comment or comment or question or whatever you want over there under any of the episodes I put of the Broadcasters Podcast. You can find it also on YouTube. We're trying to be ubiquitous here on this show as much as we can. Okay, a couple of stories I want to get into right now. First off is radio, this was a story that kind of caught my interest, and I'm thinking, well, this is something we're going to talk about for a while. Media Confidential pulls this story because they find all these great, interesting stories when it comes to stats and studies, especially now we're at the end of the year. It's always good to know about that and bring things up, so I like that. So here's what we got. Over the past 5 years, this is according to Edison's research, the rating share for the contemporary hit radio or CHR top 40 format have eroded almost a third, 32%, and this is citing Nielsen data. So here's what's going on. Now, going through the months of January through November of this year, because they really don't talk too much when it comes to December because there's a lot of Christmas programming at this point, right? That in the last 9 years, in the last 8 years, we've seen a steady decline. About the last 5 years, we've definitely seen a steady decline in the format. Okay. So there was about 8% of the listenership on all radio stations were towards contemporary hit radio. It's now down to 5.5%. In 2016, contemporary hit radio was the second most listened to format, but only behind News Talk. And now with this year's tally complete, it's now tied for fourth. It's now behind adult contemporary and country. So one might be asking, is this such a function of young people listening to less radio, thus making hit radio or music radio, top 40 radio harder to attain? 18 to 34 broadcast usage is down. 18 to 34-year-olds listening to radio, that usage is down. But the purchase on that audience is also down. So people are not buying advertising during those stations as well. Shares are down 30%. And while CHR has been the highest ranking format among 18 to 34 in each year since paper measurement, the PPM meters, which are supposed to be much more stringent than it was the diary form of acquiring and procuring ratings numbers, the gap is dwindling now. Because now it's barely ahead of country. Country's gotten more popular. So again, adult contemporary and country are now two of the top formats. And those are from our older formats usually. I mean, country does have some younger listeners, but for the most part, adult contemporary, that's like soccer mom music. But again, adult contemporary, there's a clouding right now between adult contemporary and CHR. What happens is that the adult contemporary stations are basically one of two things. They're either going to be an older format station that plays 80s, 90s today. Some might play 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, a little bit more nostalgic, up to 2000s. And then other ones, we're the hit music radio without the rock and rap. And so with some people, again, some of those stations in contemporary hit radio, the music has not been exactly necessarily quality and been great. But that's also because of the fact the music, let's just be honest with everybody. The radio people need to understand that there's not much of a shelf life to some of the songs that are out there because streaming creates a short shelf life. Like there's only a couple of songs this year that you could continue to play throughout the year. And it held up because the quality was good. Again, your number one song on the country, according to Billboard and according to most charts, is Blinding Lights by The Weeknd, which is a song that even now today, even over 55 weeks or so, it's been on the chart. So it's been over a year we've been listening to it. Going back to when Spotify had it in today's top hits, and initially we started hearing about the album. Well, that said, that song still holds up to me. And that's a song that's going to continue to hold up. It will continue to be a song that can be played in recurrent or gold for a long time. It's one of those standout songs. It's the song of 2020. And there are other songs you could do that with. But again, it's like some of the rap stuff that comes in here that comes into play. It's being crossed over, but we don't have a station that crosses over music. We don't have that many stations that do that. The other thing too is that we've had an also problem that we used to have stations that were specifically rhythmic top 40, but most of them have gone either mainstream or they've gone AC because crossover they just got rid of. And that was the biggest problem is that there was a time where we had stations that did play in the middle and major markets used to do that. When Entercom or CBS Radio that allow that, they taken some of those stations that were rhythmic stations and they turned them into mainstream. Okay, there's a couple stations in particular that really they just done such a service to. In Florida, in Orlando, and Miami, two of the major markets, they had two stations that were crossover stations. Those 102 Jams, which was WJHM in Orlando, and of course Power 96, WPOW in Miami. Those stations were rhythmic. So they would play some rap. They would play some other music that was in more than EDM or dance format. And more or less, that would be more what was going on with Power 96. They would do that. But then they changed things up. And also you would hear some very Latin-based, very Spanish-centric kind of music that would be very specific to market. Orlando would be the same way. And that changed. Because those would be songs that would end up being then eventually crossed over into top 40. And that's how a lot of songs made their way into top 40. There would be that middle ground. That's where rap actually kind of lived, along with urban contemporary. But now it's not so much. And I think because also urban contemporary doesn't have a really room for some of the songs they're playing because some of those songs are considered alternative. So they take it somewhere else. It's a very interesting dynamic now of what gets played on urban contemporary. Plus, we don't have that much R&B out there either. So like the music that's available, the radio stations are not catering to the market. They're not necessarily doing anything to help change the formatics to maybe, evolutionize contemporary hit radio. They're not doing it at all. Plus, contemporary hit radio was always relying upon personalities. They don't have any right now. They're losing more and more, and they're actually relying more on their morning shows, which, again, that's an ensemble. You don't want to hear morning shows really that go up to like about 9, 10, 11 o'clock into noon and continue to go forward like that. That's what iHeartRadio did as a directive to stretch out those morning shows. Start them early at 5 a.m. and then let them stay around till like 11 or 12 o'clock. It's ridiculous. And it doesn't work. And now we're seeing how it doesn't work. This is the thing. For CHR, iHeartRadio controls the highest group of contemporary hit stations. These are all formatted mostly by iHeartRadio. So moving along, Edison notes the reach or cum audience of many CHR stations in markets remains robust. So, for instance, Z100, the major station over in New York City, WHTZ, is right now 7th place in share, but 2nd in cum. So that means that they're still getting an audience there, right? The audience share is still similar to what it was, but their ratings are horrible. They might be still getting a number of people listening, but again, it's just the quality. I mean, not so much the quality, but it's just what they're getting in terms of the amount of audience is still getting chipped away, and they're losing some of that. So they're still getting their part of the market in some markets, but it's just not doing good. So here's two possible hypotheses as to why this is going on that Edison has deduced. One is, are there simply fewer CHR stations? No. That they said that the number of stations that track on the formers are essentially flat. Is the listing being lost to near neighbor formats? Rhythmic CHR is also at a record low. And hot AC, it's more or less, hot AC is about the same thing, is at a record low and dramatically tapering off from a 2015 peak. Not as near alternative as at a record low as well, despite a number of stations switching to the format. Currently, country is also not doing great, and they're above, they're doing better with among younger listeners, and Spanish hits and active rock are all essentially flat. Then there's the word about perhaps there's simply a dearth of compelling current music to play along adult contemporary or all contemporary formats. Well, there's a lot of songs still being out there to go and listen to and to play. But it's because, remember, that the music that's being played on these stations, it's a very limited amount. They're not taking the advantage to go ahead and play so many songs out there. They want to keep their playlists very thin and very minuscule, and that's a major problem with them. And that doesn't help them at all. So with that, you are struggling because it's a self-made struggle. These stations and these program directors, they only have certain songs they're allowed to play. Some songs will get moved up and become current based on who they are, based on who the record companies are putting in to payola them, as we know as well. What's going on is that these stations are playing what works for their bottom line. They're not playing what the listeners want. That's a big problem. They're not playing what the listeners want. They're not really playing to what the listeners really care for. I mean, they're not even engaging. No callbacks, no phone calls, no requests. None of that's being considered into the mix of what's coming on the radio and what's being played. Now, we've talked about how some stations have had some enterprise program directors, they call it, that have been willing to go ahead and follow the trends on streaming to take some songs and put them into their list. And they've done some of that. We talked about stations in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and Austin, Texas that have done that to some degree. And some of those stations, they're pulling pretty good ratings for what it's worth. You know, they've been able to pull definite shares in their markets. Now, they're not necessarily big markets, but this should be applied to other stations. That's what used to work back in the day. And they also have live jocks. They actually have some type of personalities going on throughout. They might not be great, but at least they're making the attempt, and that's better than nothing. The biggest clue to what might be happening comes when one considers this. Among 18 to 34-year-olds, both classic hits and classic rock are at record high shares. And that's what's going on too. We are realizing that there are a number of songs, a number of artists where I really see this as well. If you go to the stores, maybe not, of course people go on Amazon and go shop, but people still do go shopping. And there are like screen tees and there's graphics and there's art and all this that plays back to older music. I can't tell you how many times I go to the mall right near my house and I see all this art, it's either lithographs or sculptures or pictures and just recreations of pickup group. Beatles, Stones, AC/DC, Metallica, Poison. Like, I'm seeing young people. How often do you see young people that are, like what? Early, mid-teens, teenagers, college age? They're wearing like, rock shirts. Like they're from the concerts, right? I still couldn't believe I saw one young girl wearing a Poison shirt. Like, Poison? Really? Wow. And I think it's because some people are starting to discover the music. We see sometimes on TikTok how older songs come into play. There's a reason why all of a sudden, how did Fleetwood Mac make it back onto the top 40 of the Billboard Hot 100? Think about that. It is the music quality. We're seeing right now at Christmas time, we're seeing how certain songs are making it into the top 10 now. Remember, this, more than ever, Christmas music, it's mostly older. We have new songs that have been put out there. We see Kelly Clarkson's Underneath the Tree and One More Sleep for Leona Lewis, or we see, new songs for Carrie Underwood with a new Christmas album, or Justin Bieber has a new album with Christmas music, things like that. And Ariana Grande's got a song that she's got out there that's her thing. And of course, the mainstay of the modern era of Christmas music is Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. And that's a 1994 song. That's 26 years old. But then before that, you have, three other songs right now in the top 10 in the Christmas era of the 50s and 60s that are in the top 10. Bobby Helms and Jingle Bell Rock, Brenda Lee's Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, and Jose Feliciano's Feliz Navidad. It's amazing how those songs, all of a sudden, they are back up on the charts again. Christmas more earlier than ever, and Christmas just stands out. And it's, again, the quality of the music, the records, again, there's an appreciation for the artistry of the music when it's not so computer programmed, when it's not all beat machines and, synth drums and shit. Something to be said about when people are listening to music, especially 60s and 70s, and hearing that rock sound, or hearing it just a sound that just was very folk or very jazzy or whatever, or blues based. This could be a statement about current music and its relative quality, they say. However, it seems more likely a factor of about who is spending more time listening to the radio versus less. Plus, remember, if people are listening to vinyl and they're getting a taste of it, a lot of older music is going to come in vinyl. That's what you're going to want to hear. Edison believes the reason could be those interested in the newest music are likely scratching that itch more effectively with other non-radio options, leaving behind bigger shares for those who mostly want to listen to older classic music. Correct. Because they're not going to go to radio as the outlet for new music. This is not where they go for new music. This is where radio is missing it altogether. There is no reason why radio can't play songs that are new. And I'm talking about new. They just came out in streaming. They just got released. They could be playing it. And they could be playing it. They could be changing the rules as to how the system goes. Remember, I rant and rave about an America Top 40 with Ryan Seacrest on a regular basis because that is the model that is used with all contemporary hit radio stations, especially the ones that iHeartRadio owns and operates. This is their format. If you look at their chart, you look at what songs move up and move down. It's just a system. There's really no rhyme or reason. Like, they have a system in place. There's a formula. If an Ariana Grande or a Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber has a new song, maybe Shawn Mendes, or there's just a number of stars that they are bona fide, Post Malone, who knows, right? They're going to automatically go ahead and be brought into the chart. And that might go up to like into the top 30. They might get up into the top 40 and they might be like 22, 24, 25, 27, something like that. Positions most recently finally made into that chart, and it's like at 27. And that's been growing itself a little bit here and there. Taylor Swift, same thing. They're never, like Billboard and Spotify and Apple and the others, you'll see songs that will make it straight to number one. That doesn't happen with terrestrial radio. They don't even try that. They might have a song that might be a breakout, that might be an ad on their playlist that might get dropped into like a night show or somewhere, in afternoon drive. But when the song is hot, it's not the way it was anymore. Why radio's not allowed to do that? It's because they're controlled by the media base. Because that system has a way to do this, and the record companies want to be able to have the control over that. And for whatever reason, they know, and this is to the detriment, that Billboard, which is still the Bible of music, is still very important to have your songs put up there like they are, that radio still accounts for a considerable amount of points towards the position of a song on the chart, especially the Hot 100. With that said, so you're worrying about streaming, sales, downloads, physical sales, and radio. And that's why some songs, music record labels are able to go or content with some of their artists to go ahead and have an album be brought out. Because like Ariana Grande's new album, right? Positions. It went out, and now all the songs have been released. Shawn Mendes is going to have an album out coming up. Well, what's going to happen? What it always does. Okay, the album comes out, album bomb. Billboard gets all these songs listed on their chart, and then they'll have one release lead single that will then get played. But then they'll find out one of the other songs. They'll find out how the other songs played out in the whole mix, and then all of a sudden, you'll find out what the second and third and fourth singles are after that. Taylor Swift, a couple of, not with Folklore, but before that, or previous album, it's the same idea. It happens like that. That's how they all do that, right? That's how they all do. And it's not a good method. But again, this is where there's enough music coming out. And if you want to discover new music, you want to discover new artists, you have to go to streaming, because radio's not going to do that for you. They're not willing to. And that's the problem. That leads me to my next story. Music streaming is stalling. So from media research, they said that music streaming services have continued to add U.S. subscribers. So more people are flocking to streaming. We already know that for television, for videos, for movies and all of that. Obviously, we're seeing that. But when it comes to music, it's grown by 11 million paying users from January to September to 117.9 million active subscribers of music streaming services, of which I am one. Billboard reports, though, that the number of total streams has remained the same. And so for the past 4 months and counting, audio music streams have averaged 17.5 billion streams a week. That's a lot. But up slightly from the early March pre-pandemic peak, but before the lockdown cut music listening down by 13% to a low of 15 billion streams. Consumers stopped commuting and obsessed over the news, and then there was a rebound up to 15% by the end of June, but it has plateaued. Now, for streaming services, they say this is good news. For the past few years, they have been pouring money into podcasts, which cost them less. Streaming companies don't have to share as much revenue on podcasts, a growing number of which they own, as they do on streams of music, most of which they don't. But for record labels, publishers, songwriters, and artists, this may be the calm before the storm. In the short term, the lack of growth, at least, in the number of streams won't impact the industry's streaming revenue. If subscribers are added and consumption stays flat, rights holders will just make more per stream because they're going to make more off the ones that buy and are paid as the ones that are free. A move towards podcasts, though, could cost rights holders leverage in licensing negotiations. And here's the other thing, too. Think about this. 55,000 new tracks are being uploaded onto streaming services every day. 55,000. How is it possible that radio does not have enough songs to play? There are so many songs that don't ever make it. That, and of course, they just got to pick the cream of the crop. They should just be taking more newer songs and just get rid of the old format. It's done. It wasn't like this before, but it was controlled and contrived because the corporate giants decided to make it so. Now, there's a number of factors as to why this could be going on. So here's what they say. Label sources point to the previous year where cyclical trends in the release schedule led to finite periods of flatness. There's always things like the presidential election that also got people to, wean away from listening to music, or holidays. Other forces are putting permanent pressure on streaming volume. There's gaming. So video games is hurting right now. And that consulting from IDG Consulting, they're reporting that there's an increased average of gameplay hours per user across the board. So they're not necessarily listening to music at home. They're playing video games at home more often than not. So they go into some of the gaming that does that. But again, it's an interesting story. That's a take on some people's music. The music industry needs to, if they're not going to have live music right away, which we already know it's going to be delayed, the music industry, and for those of you that are musicians or in the music industry itself, this is all cause for concern. This is why I talk about this. There needs to be an understanding here that music and radio should be in a good harmony. Again, when the music's coming out, there should be a better relationship between music and radio, and not this payola that's going on, especially when the independent publishers don't even have a chance to get cut in. There was a reason we learned about new artists and discovered new artists. But as we've learned, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they're the ones that are going to try to control, or YouTube. They're going to be the ones that have been and are going to continue to help us discover new artists. Because the artist discovery, maybe it's not so much sometimes on Spotify, because they can procure lists that'll introduce us to new artists. But other than that, it's always word of mouth. It's always the kind of attention that people will get. And then what happens is we will get drawn to certain music that will all of a sudden be somewhere in our purview, where TikTok has done that for us. Oh, so many times this year. Because if a song is the number one song this year, it's going to come with an accompanying challenge on TikTok. We've seen that. Or it's going to have a very compelling music video that's going to stand out too. If you look at the number ones we had this year, again, Blinding Lights for a long time definitely had that. Rockstar definitely had a different video, but also just had a challenge over the summer that was just over the top. And Savage by Megan Thee Stallion and Beyonce, same thing. You just see that across the board. Savage Love, Jason Derulo. That song doesn't make it up to the number one spot if it's not for that. But then also there are the rare occasions where songs can make it up to the top. But again, one of the most biggest breakthroughs of the year is, the resurgence of BTS. They had one of the biggest songs of the year in Dynamite. Yeah, number one song in other places. But in the USA, I talked about it a few months ago. Why there's such an audience that radio could go ahead and attach themselves, because their BTS is a boy band that is quite prominent. Blackpink the same way. Why contemporary hit radio doesn't want to go ahead and get behind these guys and play their songs, I don't know. You could be playing Life Goes On and Dynamite right now. And if you're just playing those songs every couple of hours, you're going to get some people listening in. Some of your younger listeners, you're going to bring that younger listenership back up. Because they know those songs are going to be constantly there. And they don't have to go ahead and tune in and play around with their streaming service to go ahead and find the songs and play it over and over. And somebody gets to be an actual DJ and play songs that people want to hear. Wow, what a concept. I don't know. They don't want to do that yet, I guess. I don't know. That's what people want to go with, I guess. Oh, well. Okay, let's move along real quick. I got to go to our interview with Warren H. Cohn. So a couple of other stories I want to bring up while we go ahead and get to that. Actually, you know what? I'm wondering if I want to hold off these stories. Okay, so 2020 journalism crisis. I'm going to just give you a quick preface of it, because I don't want to get into that right now. I think it's something I want to hold off on, because I think that's a story that needs more time, and I want to have something to go and talk about next week. Because they do make the point that 2020 was a banner year for news. The year yielded intrepid political reporting amid a contentious election year, vital public health information amid a pandemic, exacting historical analysis amid historic protests, publications across the country cut back, stripping salaries, ousting staffers, closing offices, and shutting down print editions. So there's so much to talk about right there. I'm going to hold off on that, because they're very they're very comprehensive as they look the entire year of journalism. I want to hold on to that story and bring that up next week. We're going to table that and get into more of that. But one more story I want to get into before we wrap things up is the latest news out of the Hollywood and the labor unions. We've talked about this since April 2019. Well, we're starting to get some directions, a little more progress. The Writers Guild of America confirmed that it has reached a deal with Creative Artists Agency, CAA, for a new franchise agreement that will allow the guild members to return to the agency. And here's what's going on. So CAA may once again represent WGA members for covered writing services. And that WGA and CAA have withdrawn their legal claims that each brought to federal court. Now, there are other deals that were done with other agencies because WGA did some things where they have a new franchise agreement by the Writers Guild that they finally agreed to. So ICM and UTA, two of the other significant agencies, they're doing a thing now with this. It contains the same terms set forth in the ICM UTA deal and protects writers in the three fundamental areas that the Guild has emphasized since the beginning of the campaign. These are the three things they wanted to make sure of that they were fighting for, and it looks like they're about to win. Contract, deal memo, and invoice information will be provided to the Writers Guild, allowing them and the agency to partner in systematically addressing late pay and free work. There's now a strict 20% limitation on agency ownership of production entities. So they can't have so much ownership as they are just supposed to be more representation, not ownership of projects that they can go ahead and just pass along to their own people. And a sunset period that will end the practice of packaging by June 30th, 2022. So whatever remaining projects that are out there that might have been packaged in that way, that's gone. That's big. So along with the fact that Hollywood, the Tom Cruises of the world are trying to fight and they're yelling back at their staff to keep, be more protective of themselves because of COVID, because there's jobs on the line, right? The one thing is that Hollywood's trying to get themselves back up and going. So that's good to get the content back up. Of course, we need now the movie theaters to start making the way back up. And, I think what we're going to learn about coming up next year is that we're going to definitely see more and more where programming is going to start falling apart on the terrestrial side. Like the interest and the influence that's going on, with the programming they're putting on over there. I mean, there's going to be some projects that are going to be a little bit pandemic related. They're still going to live in the moment, I guess. Like I've been watching Shameless and it has some of that. I get it. It's their last year too, and they've been a bit of a progressive show in their time on Showtime. Other shows won't do that so much, and I'm sure there's a lot of shows we'll be watching now going forward. They're not going to be doing that either because of the fact of how they are. Maybe they're period pieces, or they're just in a different climate or environment, or sci-fi or whatever it might be. There are other shows that will definitely be. We're not going to have anything of masks or social distancing or any of that thought of real life because our programming, some of it we wanted to be fictional and dramatic and not be, it will be a complete escapism is what we want as well. In our comedies and our dramas and our action, procedurals, things like that. We do want to have some of that. For the networks, they're going to continue to go that route. That's not going to help them at all. And who knows? We'll see where they're going to go with it. But again, we're waiting to find out how things work out. We know that the streaming services are in full competition. And so whatever was going on, like the age of big money television and tens of millions of viewers, that's gone. Network is losing that altogether. Cable, they're so compartmentalized and they're so segmented out as well. They're so cookie cuttered that for them to go ahead and have a network that might go ahead and have programs that will reach 2 to 5 million viewers that are not based on sports, that's going to be where their threshold is. And if that's fine, they can hold on to it. They're fine as long as the subscription fees continue to stay. And because of the attachment of some cable companies of the deals that they have, where they're able to go and have people that might have a cable plan that might have, say, HBO in their packaging, subscribe to it, that they also are entitled to having HBO Max. If you're a Comcast subscriber, you have access to Peacock, things like that. Plus, there's the deals that have been made as well where, that's where we're going to see some, I think that we'll probably see more of that, where some companies will work together to go and offer access to their services instead of it being a complete, utter, a la carte kind of deal, where people just have to go and buy multiple services and then basically ring up the same amount of money they're paying per month for cable. So that's going to be the dynamic I think next year we're going to see be worked out on as well. But like I said, music and radio is very interesting this year. I mean, again, the direction, those studies right there off the top really interested me. And keep an eye on that. Again, I like the fact we're seeing Hollywood making their way up together. So many moving pieces right now in media. It's very fascinating. And again, like I said, we'll talk about journalism next week. And we'll see where we go with that coming up. Because there's quite a bit to go ahead and take with that. So right now I'm going to go ahead and play the Warren H. Cohn interview, part 2 of that. But next week I want to start another 2-part interview where I speak with a former music journalist, ex-radio personality, who's been very popular when it comes to doing a lot of photography and journalistic work in the music industry, especially based here in South Florida. And he is now the host of the J-Rod Concerts podcast. His name is Jamie Rodriguez. We're going to talk with him. Fascinating story. For him, he's a music journalist and concert photographer. Worked at top 40 radio station on WHYI Y100 in the mid-2000s as part of their morning show. Also has been a photojournalist working with a number of publications in South Florida, including the Miami New Times, Miami Music Magazine, and the Palm Beach Post. We'll talk with Jimmy Rodriguez in part 1 of my interview next week here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Look out for that. Meantime, time to go to my interview, part 2, as we conclude my interview with Warren H. Cohn here on the Broadcasters Podcast. So you made mention of crisis management. We're going to talk about that now. I want to go ahead and transition to that. And here, who else better than your team to talk about this? Because really, it's just, it's fascinating when I read about this. And again, I do want to put this in the best possible way possible. I want to just make this point first to you and your partner, Judah Engelmeyer. Fearless to go ahead and say, oh, why would you go ahead and represent certain clients? It doesn't matter. Business is business. And if you're able to go and do the best for a client, it's just like a lawyer. I mean, you're going in there and you're fighting hard for for what's out there. And if it's against the grain, it might be not what people are in favor of, but that doesn't matter. It's business is still business at the end of the day. So your firm has handled your share of crisis management clients. In 2018, Harvey Weinstein reached out to Judah Engelmeyer, your firm's president, to speak for him following the April 3rd decision of another crisis firm, Citric & Company, that was cutting ties with the embattled movie mogul. Without asking about any details, I don't want to know anything about the client and what your relationship and what you did for him. I really want to ask more about what your firm learned about this level of client representation by managing a once legendary figure being disowned by Hollywood, essentially.
Well, I have to say that, Judah, my partner, the president of HeraldPR, I have the utmost respect and admiration for him because he's always on the front lines of all of our crisis work. Yes, we had the embattled movie producer, and it was certainly in the news. But this was not Judah's first rodeo. He's worked on other big name celebrity type crisis work and strategic communications work. And the best work that he does, you don't even hear about, so we can't talk about. What we learned is that things are someone who's married to my beautiful wife and the son of my mother, and I have a lovely sister. We learned that a lot of things that men should believe culturally changed and moved in the right direction with the movement. But again, we, like you said, we work with a lot of attorneys. We work with a lot of white collar criminal defense attorneys. We have a job to do, and we have to remain objective and work both sides and see both sides, because, and that's the number one thing that I learned personally is that, that the media moves fast and, and there's a lot of clickbait stories. Unfortunately, the media seems to be more and more subjective these days, especially with the polarization of our nation and the upcoming election. But I definitely learned that, staying on the middle line and looking to both sides and two sides of a story is exceptionally important.
And the other thing I got to make mention of, and I grew up to be a journalist myself, and I did get to work in newspapers, and I worked in TV news and all. And I just say, from the time I came in, back in the mid '90s, out of college, and coming in now, I just have a discontent and a shame for how media is portrayed now, for what they do now, the business that's done now for clickbait, and because of the failure of the establishment to not be able to go ahead and do the due diligence to keep compelling content and to make it where you embrace digital media and transition over as you should have done beforehand, but you came in too late. Shame on you. And another digital outlets that could have done the right thing, gotten their prominence, and say, okay, we're going to go ahead and do the right thing and be objective. No. Then you decide, okay, we're not going to do that either. We're also going to go clickbait. We're just going to go and be salacious and tabloidistic. I mean, it feels like Inside Edition is a much more reputable, and National Enquirer feels like a more reputable publication than all the mainstream media combined right now these days. I can only imagine the kind of fight that Judah and yourself would have had fighting against, it's again, they want to make it a losing battle because they're in the can. They're in the bed of whoever one side of the argument is. They're never looking at on both sides.
Not with the producer, but with other cases, we've had evidence that proves, the side of our client very clearly. But if it's not going to be popular and it's not going to be clickbait, it doesn't matter. And you're talking, upper echelons of national and local newspapers. It just doesn't matter. Nope. Because they need to follow, where we're moving towards. And again, I don't like to. We're in the business of working with journalists, and I have many, many, many journalists that are my dear friends and producers, and I.
Oh, but it's not their fault. Those journalists, it's not necessarily their fault. It's the producers and the publishers that are doing that. They're also being told by somebody else high above them about what they need to do. So I don't want to put the blame on the entire industry. I'm just disappointed, completely disappointed.
But I've seen it on and I maybe shouldn't be sharing this, but I've seen it. I've seen journalists who are friends. I ask them if I can take them out for a cup of coffee, not even to pitch a story, and they will not let me buy them a cup of coffee. They buy their own, I buy my own, and we have a nice conversation, and we're just friends because they don't want to be influenced. And on the other flip side, I've seen journalists where we pitch them a story, and we're talking about it from some reputable publications, and they send us back, oh, hey, it's going to be a $700 invoice if you would like me to do this story. And it's a sad state of media, in my opinion.
And now I want to also make mention, we've already talked to, there were a couple other clients you've represented. So Food Channel star, Food Network stars Paula Deen, and one of the Real Housewives, Luann de Lesseps, also part of those that you have worked in terms of crisis management. I want to make that point across before I get to asking about that a little bit. One of the stories that I'm sure, and which you do not represent, but I'm sure you were all over looking at what the story was with Ellen DeGeneres, because that was a bombshell this year that just shook up Hollywood. And obviously, the pandemic did not help her at all. Listen, I think Ellen DeGeneres at a time, and I think just the corruption of the industry itself, Hollywood just does something to you. You're growing up and going into this. I just think that she's gone through a lot. I'm going to try to give benefit of the doubt to her. But talk about a case of crisis management to analyze. I could see that as an example that you guys would look at and just see how would you handle it yourselves. But for some context, I want to bring up the story so everybody knows, and I want to be as contextual and as objective as possible. There were accusations over the summer this year that the Hollywood Reporter described, quote, she fostered a toxic environment on the set of her top-rated eponymous talk show, which she's had for 20 years. A July BuzzFeed investigation detailed claims of intimidation, racism, and sexism levied by current and former employees of The Ellen Show. And it was the most damaging in a series of reports that painted a dark portrait of the host once considered America's sweetheart. Parent company Warner Media launched an investigation that led to the ouster of 3 top producers and additional benefits for staffers, including some time paid off. PR gurus said that the I Stand By Ellen movement, hashtag I Stand By Ellen, which seems to have been started by her wife, Portia de Rossi, what appeared with her in the 2020 Super Bowl ad for Amazon Alexa had all the designs of a coordinated effort. Now, before I get into that, I want to just make this point. With Ellen DeGeneres, she comes back to TV, and, first of all, the way she was treating her staff during the pandemic, having a private crew go to her Malibu home, she wouldn't even trust her own staff that's been working with her for a number of years to go work with her. Only the producers, which kept a barrier, like a moat, in front of everybody else that could go and communicate with her. And then she comes back, makes a quick joke about it, doesn't really address the situation, and just blows it off. Just out of curiosity, when you look at what that is right there, how do you perceive just an overall view of what the Ellen DeGeneres deal was, and how you look at it from your perspective?
So I'll take off my crisis management hat for a minute, and I'll put my human being or regular Joe hat on, and I'll say that my old man, my wonderful dad, always raised me to say that it's the janitor in the building, it's the maid in the hotel, it's the doorman of a building. They have the keys to everything. And if you're kind to them and you're kind to the little people is the wrong word, but forgive me for that, that usage of that term. But if you're kind to the regular everyday person and up, that's how you get by in the world, and that's how you should be. And again, we should all be that way by default. So, I think, mistreating staff, especially during the pandemic, we did our very best to not fire anyone. I cut a lot of corners on other things and did things to keep folks on. And I believe very much in a good culture and in caring about your staff. So as a human being, I don't like doing things like that. But as a then crisis manager hat back on, I think that, again, stay on the middle line. And, I think that with the salacious media environment that we're in and the celebrity and brand that is Ellen, it's very easy for them to, for a story to leak and, for accusations to get out there and for her to be judged in the court of public opinion prior to anything being substantiated, as we've seen in many instances. But, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a coordinated effort, to turn this around as best as possible. But it also seems like the media went after her pretty hard.
All right. So Judah Engelmeyer, your partner, he talked to Hollywood Reporter about the story here. He says, quote, and he really same sentiments you're saying here. Quote, what about the people who deal with her every single day? Her producer, her manager, the coffee delivery guy in the office. It's about the people who get to see things that the public doesn't get to see. I'm very critical on how the media establishment resorts to clickbait rather than objective content, and that is derived from the showbiz media. That's what I'm saying. So now, again, we mentioned that you worked crisis work for stars like Paul Dean, Luann de Lesseps, and Harvey Weinstein. So the thing is, it's a struggle that PR firms have to fight two battles from not only the accusers, but the media that elevates the narrative. And I can just imagine, for something like a Hollywood Reporter or one of these industry rags, which have very deep ties, and they're also under deregulation of the SEC, you have all these publications under one roof. I just saw Billboard and Rolling Stone are now under the same company. The idea is that Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Deadline are almost within the same companies. But the thing is, for something like this to go ahead and make it all the way to the top, to get this kind of expose out there, when you think these publications would want to protect these people because of their relationships, to let it go that far, and then you have to come in as a PR firm that might be representing a client, the magnitude of how far they want to take this, if they're willing to go ahead, and it's an expense to them to sacrifice somebody out like that. Talk about the struggle that goes with that, because obviously that tells you how far they're willing to go. I
mean, I must say that I'm not in the shoes of an editor in chief or a producer or booking manager. So I don't know what their decisions are with that. I'm sure that no one's knocking on your door if they're not suspicious. But I definitely, like I said earlier, think that if you have a salacious story about a celebrity and you can conduct a takedown and get, look at I don't want to get into politics, but I will. Look at the New York Post with the Hunter Biden thing. Obviously, timing, it was a hit piece, et cetera, et cetera. But it went everywhere, so much so that it got controlled by Twitter and Facebook, and and now we see that. So I don't think that you can just carte blanche, unless you're one of the rags, really publish anything that's false or unverified. I think there's fact checkers and people are verifying things, but I definitely think that some liberties are taken at times. But to answer your question more directly, I think it's a tough decision, because if you're tied to Hollywood and you're tied to a star like that, or one of the talk show hosts, you exchange favors. You're at the pre-pandemic, you're at the holiday, the Hollywood parties together, on the red carpet together. It's a tough decision to make to cross that line, but I would say that there was probably something there.
And it's hard to be the one that it might have to be a disruptor, but then you have to go back after all this is said and done, and then there's still industry functions and networking that you still want to do in order to bring on new clients. And then it's a matter of, well, it's a tough place to be in. And like you said, when it comes to the New York Post story, regardless of what people think about it, the censorship is what I have a problem with. And now we know that the fact is that there are other reasons underlying as to why the censorship, because it's not just censorship for censorship. It's being done because we're seeing, and just like in the story with Ellen DeGeneres and the people that probably work with her, or the studios that try to connect with the Hollywood Reporter or other publications like that, there's some other underlying motives that we're not going to know about. Ulterior motives, if you will. We don't know why. But if they come to light, God forbid what happens if people come to light and they find out what happens, because that kind of scandal, people are not going to come back from, and that's something that will shock the entertainment world if it happens. That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely, there's definitely a layer of unseen that the public doesn't see.
What they don't want you to know. They always talk about that, right? So it's like, sorry, I'm a National Choir type of guy. It's like, I want to know. Just like the old days, right? In a recent interview in my program here, I talked to a black media producer / artist / entrepreneur, and he was the owner of APRT Media, currently owner, Mwinza Kasire. Now, I want to ask you a question I asked about him, about the media and entertainment industry to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to ask you the same question I asked him. BusinessCommunity.com recently wrote, "Now more than ever, businesses of all sizes are investing time and energy into diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and denouncing racism. And many are paving the way for deeper acceptance and change. Businesses who will embrace change and inclusion as part of their corporate culture will often create smart business strategies, boost their financial performance, outperform less diverse peers on profitability, and make their employees feel valued and included. So 2/3 of job seekers now consider workplace diversity an important factor when considering employment opportunities, and consumers are paying attention to diversity in communications too." So I wanted to get your overall take on DEI and the media, your thoughts, the changes happening right now, because obviously, just seeing where we have that some of the issues that PR might bring up is part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's something that's an underlying factor as to why some of the clients you've brought on board, that's why this is brought out. And then now we have performative allyship as another part of this. So take me your take about the EI and how it's dealt with right now, causing the effect of what you need to do for crisis management and even for your own team.
Yeah, I think that we're moving in the right direction. As I said before, with the Me Too movement, I think that it's I don't know why it took us so long to have this aha moment. I also, I am, even though my name is Warren Cohn, my mom is from Lima, Peru, and she's an immigrant. I'm a Latino. So I definitely believe that, if my mom wasn't given the chance to come here and go to school and get, her first jobs, and before she had a green card, and I wouldn't be here today myself. So I think that, that we're moving in the right direction, and we should have been moving in this direction a long time ago. And I'm happy to see that, many of the award ceremonies are moving in that direction. It's not just you have to watch BET to see, the honors of African American leads and both male and female or supporting actresses and actors in films. I think that the media is moving in the right direction. I am concerned with the polarity of our nation. in not respecting that. But I think that the media has brought it to light, and I think that we're moving in a good direction as far as that goes. And I think that every company should do their best to hire people based on merit, and and that means everybody, and that.
Yep. Yeah, most important when it comes to DEI, it's always merit and performance. It's not checking the boxes. I wouldn't want it that way, and that's just where it comes down to. Now, I mentioned influencer marketing. We started off the interview with that. We're going to come back to that because I think it ties into what goes on with DEI as well. Now, PR Week recently wrote, and I can only get this part because the paywall is up, these bastards. Okay, thank you, PR Week. Why don't you go and let us, once in a while, have a free article, huh? Throw a bone, huh?
With all the platforms, how could you possibly pay for a login for each one?
I know, exactly. But again, everybody's wanting a paywall. Yeah, guys, I'm not going to go back to you if you're going to keep doing that, okay? But at least I'll take what your headline and your subheader is.
Yeah.
So so they recently wrote that more than half, and I couldn't find out where they were quoting this from, but I guess that's all they wanted. More than half, 55% of marketers are anxious about working with social media influencers who are vocal about social and political issues. Celebrities, we already know that's an issue right now, and they're doing, from them doing John Lennon's Imagine to being naked to make people go vote because of naked ballots and all this kind of stuff, right? So with that, influencer marketing has swooped in and has become the dominant marketing strategy of 2020, given the increase of political messaging in this election cycle that we're going through. Do you see any kind of exhaustion? And that's why firms are wanting to work with more influencers. Is that, again, that's where I think the mask is off on celebrities. Their politics, we don't want to know about your politics. Act, sing for us. Please do not do anything else. We love you for that. Why are you going to come in here and, alienate half your audience? That's what you're going to do. So influencers don't give us that, hopefully, if they're smart enough. What do you say?
I say that I've seen a lot of influencers who are doing that, and who are leaning in that direction. I think it's become the very popular thing to do. The media is certainly leaning in that direction, and it seems like it's, everyone is, I understand that the population is polarized and voters, there are Trump voters and there's Biden voters.
Yeah.
And some Biden voters are just anti-Trump voters. I am one of those that believe that I am absolutely expletive exhausted by this. I turned on, Red Zone to watch football on Sunday. I'm sadly a Jets fan. You guys beat us very nice handily. We got a donut last week. So I watch a Red Zone instead of the Jets now because it's painful. But next to the score where it says third down, it now says don't forget to vote. On the field it says don't forget to vote. Everywhere you turn, everywhere you look, I am absolutely and utterly exhausted. I said to my wife this morning, it's a week from now. It'll be. I know it won't be over. That's naive, but at least the messaging will be over. I don't think people will be, because of the polarity of this and because of who Trump is and the disgust that people have with him. I think that people in Hollywood and certain influencers will not be stained by having taken a stand. But me as an individual, I'm done. I'm fed up. I don't need it. As the quote said, sing, dance, act, show us your talent. I don't need to, voting is private. Endorsements are private. Endorsements are for other elected officials, for unions, and for PACs and other organizations. The fact that everyone's active, I think, I remember the MTV, Get Out the Vote campaign as I was growing up, and P. Diddy.
Vote, yeah.
That was more concentrated effort or smaller, and it was that was to gain interest in the tweens and teens who were registering. But now it's everywhere. You can't. It's unavoidable, and I just want to put on music in my car that I can control and not be bothered because I know that the election's a week from now.
I mean, I look at TikTok videos and I'll see some of the stars like a Charlie D'Amelio, who's the biggest thing in the world right now in that space with the Black Lives Matter fist. Like, okay, listen, God bless you for wanting to go ahead and, put that out there. But I have to feel at 16 years old, you're being pressured to do that. And second, are you even well read to really know what's going on? Because you don't live the life of it. It's like, who's kind of telling you that you feel like you need to go and do something like this? And that whole thought of like, you don't listen, Johnny Carson never talked politics. I know it sounds like an old person saying that, but it's true. You just have people that the actors of old, they never did this. We didn't put our politics out there like that. You might have a comment here and there, but really it doesn't make a difference because you're not going to sway. Like, I mean, here's the thing too. For as many celebrities that are coming out now, speaking for one side, for what it is, okay, is that going to work? Last time they tried it, it didn't work. The thing is, will the people that are the true in power, are they going to realize what they've been doing for years and years? It doesn't work because we have a digital disruption. Again, celebrities don't have the kind of star power they had before. And thinking you're going to put them out there, being forced in some cases or being basically gunned to the head, you need to go get naked, Sarah Silverman, and go speak your mind. Okay, fine. But is that going to help you out in the long run? You're basically just being used as bait. Because you might not be doing anything else with your career, but it's like, well, I need to do this because maybe I'll get another paycheck sometime. It's like, that's where I come from with all this. And I'm saying to myself, there's so much control. You can't even just have your career and enjoy it. No, there's so many different things that will hold you down, or you could basically be, virtually blackmailed. So that you have to have a stand. You have to say this or that. You have to fall in line with the rest of your ilk in your profession just to go and keep working. And you can't even get to enjoy what you're doing. So like you're brought into it, you enjoy it, and then all of a sudden you're like stuck in this purgatory of being able to be famous, but then you can't be famous and without having to go ahead and be pushed around.
I'm voting for Kanye.
Hey, you got some good stuff going on right there. I like what he was saying on Joe Rogan, man. I do.
He's interesting. Obviously, he's a special. He's a character, and I respect his career. Career. I think I respect celebrities who put out an album, do what they do, act, and then they go home and they live a regular life, or they live in Wyoming or wherever, and they try to live as normal as possible, and they stay on the sidelines. I agree completely that it's that. They are being made to choose a side now, and that it doesn't need to. I don't think anything's going back in the can. I think we're only going to see this moving forward more and more. But I don't think that they need to opine on this, and the fact that they think that they need to. Yeah. And also with income inequality, I've spoken to a lot of young folks. We have interns. I'm very close with. I went to Tulane in New Orleans, and the on-campus, folks, and I was a mentor to some students last year. With income inequality, like, do I want someone who has $500 million from their acting career telling me what to do? How do they relate with me? How do they relate with a young person? There's no how does them telling me to vote get me a job after college? How does that them how does it help me in other ways? And I've heard that from many young folks. Now that I have gray hairs, I can say that. And it's fascinating to see that. And I think that speaks to, to what you're saying as far as them jumping in and choosing a side and putting their face or their other parts, out there. Yeah.
And I just think that I also see that there are certain people that are trying to go in and speak for themselves where, you see like Ice Cube or 50 Cent, and then 50 Cent he has to take back what he said because Chelsea Handler, who probably has some kind of blackmail on him, which is why she was the one that spoke out to make him to change his tune, sing a different tune, get back in line. That's why she did what she did. It's like I don't want to be a part of that. Like I like the idea of being, having influencing, but then also I would want more people, as you're listening to this program, if you're an aspiring influencer, if you're an aspiring actor, actress, or whatever, to keep the autonomy for yourself. Do not be controlled by these people that think you have your best interest. You have to keep your own best interest, and you have to fight back, and you have to push back at every turn and be confident of your craft, because that's what's going to keep you working. That's all there is to it. Before we're going to wrap things up, I want to go ahead and direct people to your website, HeraldPR.com. And I see that you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, Instagram. And real quickly, talk to our listeners about what you do and how people can get involved and really get engaged. Maybe they want to go have you on as a client after they've heard you.
Yeah, well, I first have to say, if I may, that I agree with you across the board, but 50's line was still, was priceless. That I don't want to be 20 cent. I love that.
Well, because they're not going to remember he took it back. They're going to remember he said 50 cents, 20 cent. Right.
So again, we do public and media relations. We do influencer marketing, marketing, branding, web development, and strategic and crisis communications. And I, graciously thank you for having me on today. Hey,
my pleasure. Thanks for being so candid and being open to what we talked about. I just think it's great. And also, you're based in New York and New Orleans. Are you in New York right now?
I'm currently working at WFH, man, from New Jersey. My house in New Jersey with my kids barged in, but I luckily locked the door, which sometimes works. But yeah, we're based in Midtown Manhattan. We're based on Poydras in St. Charles in New Orleans, and we're soon to open up an office, if that's even a thing, in 2021 in South Florida near you.
Oh wow, very nice. Well, what part of South Florida are you looking at?
We're looking at Boca or Miami, but probably Boca, so we can be in the midst of a lot of different things.
Hey, let me know when you make it. I'd love to go and take a visit. Hopefully, when all this is all said and done, right?
Yeah, please. And if I spoke to Judah earlier and I told him what I was doing, but he said if you'd ever like to have him on, I'm not trying to pitch you, but he
PR guy pitching. There you go.
No, he could go deeper. The truth is, I'm not on the front lines too often anymore, but
right.
But he could talk real deep about all the crisis stuff. Although he would probably be more evasive than me.
Sure. Well, that's how he does so good in PR, right? That's what he has to do. Let's look at that. We'll follow up on that. Warren Cohn, again, CEO and founder of HeraldPR. Thanks for being with us on the Broadcasters Podcast. So glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Really glad to have Warren on the program. Great interview with him. Again, come back next week. More interviews. Another feature interview coming up with Jamie Rodriguez, we talked about a little while ago. And I will talk about journalism in review for 2020, which I gave you a little tease for. We're going to go into detail about that next week. And whatever else comes up as we get over to Christmas. We'll be on Christmas Eve, roughly, as we record next week's Broadcasters Podcast. Until then, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program. The Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at KingofPodcasts.com.